G'day, Schultzy. Two Ordinary Cops, mate. Coming to you live today for me from Tin Can Bay, Queensland. How are you, Schultzy?
Good, mate. I'm sitting down in the same old spot downstairs in my house. Yeah, mate. Well, it's a bit like a man cave down here. So yeah, mate. I'm just sitting here, normal place as ever, sweating away because it's hot here
Yeah,
in Brisbane.
bit warm. Well, I'm in an air-conditioned motel, so I'm sweet. How you been? What's been happening?
Well, mate, actually, we've got quite a few people got in contact with us, and some regulars and all that, especially in relation to the tourniquets and all that sort of stuff. But and also like assaults police. I think one actually mentioned he's 6'2". He's only been spat on. Yeah, but he goes, not too many people take a swing at him. I suppose at 6'2", and if you're well built, it can keep you. People won't quite pick on you quite as much. So
Yeah, no. People who are willing to assault police generally aren't very courageous. So yeah, it's makes sense.
But mate, I will give a shout out to first. Oh well, Dean Pitt left a comment on one of our reels and said, loves the podcast and he's from Toowoomba. So shout out, mate. Thanks for getting in contact, and it's always good and positive to hear that sort of feedback. So that's good.
Yeah.
And mate, we got Malcolm from Police Air Wing. So he sent us a message. So he must have listened to episode 40.
Oh, very good. That was the prisoner transfer.
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's funny we talk about air wing and prisoner transfer because I had an excellent contact last night from Reece Chiswell, who's the current chief pilot at the NT Police Air Wing. So
Wow.
he'd be after my time. He started in 2017 down in Alice, and I'd left by then. And when I was there, I was sort of more coronial stuff, so I didn't have a lot to do with air wing at that time. I don't know if I've met Reece or not, but he flicked through a pretty decent message, like a fairly long message about the fallout of the air wing incident that we spoke about, where one of the pilots flying back from Yalara to Alice Springs actually had a cockpit intrusion from a prisoner that was being transported, and as a result of that, there was a lot of policy change within prisoner escorts within air wing aircraft, and it's actually really interesting. So I'm just going to read this out because there's quite a bit to it, and I don't want to paraphrase and miss his point. So he sent me the message last night. This is Reece Chiswell. He's going, "G'day, Damo. Start off saying, love the podcast. I'm the current chief pilot at NT Police Air Wing. Listening to the Escorting Prisoners episode was great and was awesome for the Air Wing getting some airtime. Muzza still keeps in touch, and that's Murray Cuthbertson, the legendary Murray Cuthbertson,
Yep.
who you've mentioned many a time, who was basically just the ultimate fixer of problems. He would get Police Air Wing mobile anytime you needed them, and he was just a magnificent asset to the police force, and especially for those remote members. He also mentioned Malcolm and Trevor, and ironically, that's Mal, who you just mentioned, got in touch with us. So Malcolm and Trevor since moved on. He says he joined in 2017, replaced the pilot who was, I won't name the pilot from Yalara Alice. He hasn't really spoken to me about that, and I don't need to tell his story. So he goes, I remember chatting to him after the event, and then him giving me a prep talk when I applied for the position. For someone who has flown hundreds of prisoner transfers over the years, even for me, it really reinforced that it is perceived as a mundane job, and most often the escorting members are called in on OT and have little to no rest between shifts. Of recent time, the youth remands we have been carrying are proving complex at times, with the rock star attitude and really twitchy body language. We have all the new squads come through Air Wing during their training at PMC, and we go through the grip restraints used, and to this day we still tell the recruits the story of what happened, as well as the new younger generation of pilots we've been taking on board of recent. Also, I believe the mag light in question may have made its way into my bedside table after the aircraft had a rekit, and fair enough too, mate, because it's a piece of Air Wing history, that particular mag light. I think it played a massive role in potentially saving the life of the 4 people on board. I'm not sure if there are other prisoners on board that particular flight, but it certainly saved the innocent lives on that plane that day. And the woman who involved, she wasn't She was injured, but she certainly wasn't killed. So her conduct that day certainly had the ability to cause death or serious harm, and a very high level use of force was justified against her. So I found it really interesting that someone like Reese would reach out and actually mention that. And I've actually asked Reese that he's happy that I speak about this on the podcast, and he was happy with that. So
Yep.
um, I think a couple of things out of that. I sent a message to Reese as well just before, asking if he knew of any policies or anything that changed nationally around that particular incident, even within CASA, and he wasn't aware of anything. But it had it had a massive impact on prisoner transfers in the Northern Territory and about the level of security that we treat them with. He made a very interesting point in that he goes, it's perceived as a mundane job, and most often the escorting members are called in on OT or have had little to no rest between shifts. Well, I remember doing them between night, or not necessarily between, but certainly after night shift. And I remember getting on that plane, and certainly the flight out it only took a minute in my brain, because as soon as the aircraft taxied, I fell asleep, and I only woke up by the jolt when the plane hit the ground at the other end. So realistically, you've got to understand that I was very, very fatigued escorting these prisoners, and that's not safe. That's not where you need to be.
Yeah.
I think, having spoken to you about this just before we started, it opens up a really good. I mean, we can talk about the prisoner escorts on Air Wing and how it's so Monday. We've covered a lot of this on the prisoner transfers episode that we did do. However, a really good thing to come out of this is complacency, police complacency in day to day life, and complacency. Not that it affects them directly, but within the public, in thinking that something like a traffic stop, is such a mundane, routine thing.
Yep.
Well, a traffic stop can turn completely lethal really, really quickly. Um, I would say that the William shooting matter, chasing up a missing person who happened to be wanted, well, that's extremely mundane. It might not sound mundane to the average Joe on the street, but for a police job, that is as ordinary as it gets.
Yep.
So, from very, very basic, ordinary jobs, I know we've sort of touched on complacency throughout this podcast, but we haven't really spoken about complacency um, in detail. And I know that both of us will have thousands of our own examples of where we've been complacent.
Yep.
And we can certainly talk about a few of them. But yeah, I also just want to talk about complacency and how that trickles into the job, and how it doesn't just affect operational response. It can also impact on how things like domestic violence matters are attended to and dealt with. So I think there's a bit we can delve into there. So have you got anything to start off with, mate, with complacency? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, mate. Just something you mentioned before, and I remember talking to some. And look, just a bit of a shout out to the traffic cops. The traffic apprehensions are probably one of the most unpredictable scenarios you can get, because unless you get the information from the person driving the car, or the car or something like that, there's very little alerts. When you go to domestics and all that, usually they're known to police, so you've got an idea of what's happening. But pulling a car over on the side of the road, there is very little information available to you about what potentially could be inside that car. And I know they've spoken about it before. It is actually probably one of the most dangerous things without that you can't be prepared for. So um, so I thought that was. And look, and also traffic cops, like they would pull over hundreds of cars a day.
Yeah,
And most people are are good law abiding citizens, apart from maybe speeding a little bit and all that sort of thing. So I reckon complacency could really creep into like that area very well. But you also mentioned domestics. Now, yeah, I mean, geez. So many, especially when you go to the same ones all the time.
yeah,
Like the same people, and you kind of you can predict about what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. But I think it's important to not fall into that trap of being complacent, and actually, just I suppose spark yourself up a little bit and liven up. I mean, I spoke about that one where I had to taser a guy, and I like my personal OC spray, my little bloody what is it, Mark 6 or Mark whatever it is. Um, it had no spray in it. Hadn't had any spray in it for a year. I just hadn't bothered replacing it.
Mm.
But and that's complacency, really. And that's definitely my fault. But I suppose it's I mean, I rarely used that pepper spray. If I was going to use one, I was always using the party pack normally because it had a
Yeah.
bit more impact. But
So the
yeah,
thing about complacency, sorry, I'm just the beautiful relation. I think how people can relate to this, and non-police especially, is that there are lots of people who do jobs that are potentially dangerous. Thousands of different professions in the world can be complacent. Um, a traffic controller on the side of on a roadworks crew can be complacent. Anyone operating heavy machinery, extremely dangerous, capable of killing a human instantly, they can become complacent.
yep,
It's because it's something you do all the time. Lots and lots of professions where your complacency might not necessarily result in danger to a human being, but it certainly might result in mistakes on an accounting form that cost companies millions of dollars. It could anything. There's anything that you think, and I want people who aren't police to think about a mundane activity that they do in their job that has potential ramifications if it's not done properly. And that's what we're getting at. Complacency in policing is a little bit, I suppose, foreign to anyone who's not a police officer because they're thinking you're pulling over a car, you don't know what's in there. Once you are certainly trained, once you're trained to be able to respond tactically, you're aware. And I think
yes,
the average Joe, maybe not so much, but certainly a brand new recruit on their first traffic stop, their heart rate would be up.
yep,
What are we confronting? What's happening here? How's this person going to react to getting their ticket? That's fine. And I've said this a couple of times already. For the first 500 times you do it, you are completely on the ball.
mm,
And you might be on the ball 90% of the time that you're actually doing that job. But it might be that you're slightly, and this is purely, I'm just using traffic because it's very relatable to people who aren't police. It might be that it's lunchtime and you're just heading back to the station to grab your lunch out of the fridge. You've been out doing your job all day. You've been pulling over cars all day, and um, you've been vigilant every single time you've done that. It might be that you're now hungry. You've decided you're going on your lunch break, and you're literally just driving back. And a vehicle might run a stop sign in front of you and pull out in front. Maybe not even cutting you off, but you watch them roll through a stop sign. So you go, look, on the way back, I'll just book this fella for that. Well, that fella might have rolled through that stop sign because he just murdered his wife, and his wife's in the trunk of the vehicle. You don't know that. You don't know any of this. You could pull that person over, and they believe that in their own internal anxiety and one-minded guilt and all the rest of it, and total paranoia, that you somehow have responded to your crystal ball, and you know that that man's got his dead wife in the back of his car. You don't even realize you're dealing with a person who is at the end of desperation in their life.
yep,
You pull over behind them, and they could have a gun in the car, and you walk up very kindly to say, mate, just letting you know, bang, that's the end of that. It very, very rarely happens in Australia. Unfortunately, it does happen quite a bit in the United States. So I think the big thing in Australia is that can potentially happen at any stop. You don't know what people have just done. We've all investigated, well, both you and I have investigated murders. We
yep,
don't know how desperate the person is that we're pulling over. We don't know anything about this vehicle, anything about these people. And that's where, just even when you're not complacent all the time, just a moment of complacency can cost you your life. And that's the thing. And it's very difficult to maintain constant vigilance all the time in a job that you do constantly.
yep.
It becomes mundane because you do it all the time. And I think that's the point of complacency. And I mean, I can rattle off a few. Have you got any times where you were complacent and something came back to bite you?
Mate, I'm just trying to. It's funny. I've got some. I've actually got a fairly funny story, so I'll just run with this. And this is, I mean, it was a traffic stop. So what happened was I was working with Tim Liness. I'll give him a shout out. He won't mind me giving him a shout out. And anyway, we're working in Ramangini, but I had to go up to Maningreta to go and deliver something, and I was on duty. He was off duty. And he said, since you're going up there and going back, can you drop me off at the Blythe River and I'll do some fishing? for barramundi. I said, yeah, not a problem. So I dropped him off, which is about halfway. Oh, not quite. It's a bit close to Ramangini, but yeah. So I dropped him off there to do a bit of fishing, and then I went up to Manangreta to do what I had to up there, and came back in about an hour and a half. And I picked him up on the way back, and he found this. Oh, he caught a very nice barra. So yeah, quite a good size. Anyway, so we just threw it in the back of the police cage, and we're just travelling back. And as we turned onto the road that goes into Ramangini off the well, it's not a main road, but it's a dirt track. We Anyway, this car kind of was in front of us. It came up from the southern road, like from the Gapawiak way, and it turned onto the road. And it's just getting on dark, and it didn't have its tail lights or something weren't working. So anyway, I've just said, "Oh, mate, I'll just pull this one over." Anyway, I went to pull it over, and the car sped off. So of course we got involved in a pursuit, which probably went for about 10 kilometres, and finally they actually pulled off. They pulled off the side of the road, jumped out as a car was rolling, and it ended up rolling into the bush, and they disappeared. We couldn't find them. But then we had this car, and we're sitting there going, "What the hell is this? This vehicle?" It ended up like investigations. So we checked on the system. No, it's registered to a teacher in Gapawiak. We're going, "Well, that's weird." That's here anyway. So we've tracked it down. It was stolen from Gapawiak
Mm.
about 2 hours earlier,
Yeah.
and we just happened to come across it, and just didn't we thought we were just doing a routine traffic stop, just checking the lights. But yeah, no, it was that we actually came across a stolen car, and but like that's what you were saying before. That could be anybody in that car.
You have no idea who's in the vehicle. Yeah.
No, and I had no idea that they were going to run from us.
Yep.
I mean, the funny story about that was this barramundi was flying around in the back of the cages. We're in this pursuit, um, and
Oh,
later on, I took a photo of Tim holding the barramundi up in front of the stolen car. So as a
completely minced up, probably.
yeah.
Yeah. What a waste of a good fish.
Oh yeah, exactly. But yeah, like so when you were talking about that, that kind of sparked that memory
Yeah.
coming back. But how about you, mate?
Yeah, look, obviously I didn't do any traffic work. We did what we had to do as probationary constables, but a lot of mine wasn't necessarily to do with traffic. And I think um, dealing with investigations and certainly in those tactical investigative roles that I did, say the substance abuse intelligence desk, part of drug and organised crime squad, we didn't really get complacent dealing with that. Every single time every time we kicked the door doing a search warrant, we certainly had our wits about us. But they're not mundane jobs. This is the thing. Complacency comes into play when things are mundane. We did it a lot, but it's not a mundane thing. You know that you're invading someone's territory and doing things that they don't want you to do. And the people involved in that kind of business aren't necessarily the nicest people in the world. So we certainly weren't complacent with search warrants. We had thorough briefings, very well planned responses, and all the rest of it. So that's not so much complacency. I think my next example, so the complacency can come from just having what you believe is a routine interaction with somebody, not knowing anything about that person, having interacted with literally tens of thousands of people beforehand and absolutely nothing went wrong.
Yep,
And then you do it one time and everything goes completely wrong. So the other example is not so much an operational safety issue immediately for you, but people in the public often comment on news articles relating to coronial outcomes from domestic violence homicides, where police have had 10 previous involvements with this couple, blah, 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 and didn't do anything here, didn't do anything there. And now this woman's been murdered. And the responses on social media absolutely slaughter the police. And so do the coronial findings quite often. And I
yep,
think this is where I really want this to be understood by people who aren't police. Domestic violence in the northern and forget the Northern Territory in policing in Australia is as common for general duties police officers as pulling over a car.
yep,
You literally go from almost domestic to domestic to domestic to stealing to reports of people drinking to this to that to that. But domestics are just an absolute constant. Domestics have been defined, and we've mentioned this in the other ones we've spoken about. Domestic violence incidents have been defined by law as being an argument between a brother-in-law and his brother, like resulted in nothing. That's actually technically a domestic violence incident. You'll
Yep.
turn up to that and you'll deal with it. You move to the next one. You're constantly dealing with intrafamilial problems, and a lot of it's not actually violent. It's just people are no longer capable of dealing with the conflict. So what they do is they call the police. And it mightn't even be violent. There mightn't be any physical altercation. It might have been a very loud verbal altercation with threats or whatever else, or not even. Just someone who can't deal with it, who want the police to move people on. And because the parties involved happen to be related in the defined way through the Domestic and Family Violence Act, it becomes a domestic. As a result, you just go to domestics constantly. And this is in every jurisdiction. It's concentrated in the Northern Territory. What can happen is you'll go to a husband and wife who constantly fight, and people think, well, hang on, she's being victimized all the time. No, no, no. She's 50% of the time the offender. They have reciprocal domestic violence orders. They are both victims and offenders in the same on their own particular orders. They have a completely reciprocal domestic violence order. This is going to be completely foreign to anybody who's not a police officer, but this is the complexity of domestic violence.
Yeah.
You'll turn up to these couple 1,000 times. You'll turn up to them time after time after time, and you'll deal with them. You might arrest one, you arrest the other. You take out both orders, you've got all that squared away. Then one day you turn up and either he or she has been murdered. Well, now there's obviously a major incident there. And as a result, it could be that that matter comes back and the police are body slammed. But
Mm.
if you bring it back a little bit, it could be that right, these people have been subject to about 5 or 6 police involvements. All of them don't meet the criteria um, to bring on a domestic violence order or anything else. Or it might be that one day they do, but you've already been to them 5 times and it never met the order. It always happens like this. This one does this and that one does that. We take that one to that house and that one goes to that house. The complacency in this domestic violence response comes in where you know all these things, you know their history, you know what they're like, they're volatile and all the rest. And one day when when something does occur that triggers the need to take out an order or to do what you need to lawfully do under the law, you don't do that because it's like, oh, we're only going to be back here again tomorrow. It's just the same shit, different day. And all of a sudden you're dealing with a homicide and the police have now left open to criticism. And that's a different level of complacency. That's the complacency that costs lives because you haven't, on this one particular occasion, out of just sheer mundaneness, just sheer turning up to these people all the time. And this is completely relevant to anyone in the Northern Territory outside of, I would even say everywhere, because you've got your repeat customers. You know who these people are. Every
Yeah.
shift knows who these people are. And the one day that you don't do your job completely properly because you've got something else on your mind, you might have another job that's outstanding, or it might even be that you're being called for another job, any available unit, any available unit. It's those times where a little bit of complacency, Murphy's Law will kick in and things will go really badly and you'll leave yourself open to that criticism. And that's the other side of complacency. It varies from an operational incident where you get assaulted right through to an administrational error where you don't respond in an appropriate manner, and as a result of not doing what you have to do by general orders or the law, you're now open to massive criticism and a response administrationally through the police force. So that's another side that I was thinking of with complacency. What are your thoughts there?
Mate, yeah, like yeah, domestic. There was one recently, where another woman got burned, and I think it was Logan or something like that just the other day. But that was more also police. I think they had 76 domestic violence cases that they couldn't attend to because they were just busy, overwhelmed with everything else, and that just backs up exactly what you're saying. The domestics now, mate. I spoke to a couple of Queensland coppers, and they said that's all we do is
Yeah,
domestic. And you're exactly right. They're just dealing with the same people over and over again. And look, you've just reminded me of something else as well, and something that I suppose really played on my mind. And I don't think you don't realize it too much when you're actually doing the job. I more realized it when I left, that we make decisions, especially domestic related, because we go to so many of them. We make decisions every single day on people's lives or how we're going to resolve this situation. And it can be one small thing that is slightly different from the run of the mill. And it doesn't even really mean you're being complacent. It just means that you can't predict what somebody else is going to do. And that could be the time that they murder them. It's like I just remember thinking back a number of jobs, I would continually check myself going, oh shit, I don't know, like something else could go wrong here. Have I made the right decision? Or, have I been too hard? So cops themselves, and I think most would agree with this, you're always questioning yourself whether you actually made the right call, about this situation. And the thing is, and we've spoken about this as well, it's all good in hindsight to look back and go, why didn't the police do this? Well, that information wasn't available to the police at the time they made that decision. So it's yeah, but I can completely, like I've had people. I remember there was one couple in Kalkaringi. They were having domestics every day, and it was the same thing. Like, but it wasn't. It was more about. I remember one of them like rang up one day because he said, "Oh, he's got a knife," but he wasn't threatening her. He's just got a knife. She's just complaining about it. So like, and she just handed him the phone. So I spoke to him. I was on prisoner watch. I couldn't go running out the door.
Mm.
But it's one of those situations that could have turned bad. But due to lack of resources, there, what more could we do?
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
I
that's not
mean,
not so much complacency. That's more just you just simply don't have the resources to deal with what it is. But
mm,
and I mean that's getting prevalent too. Where there's only so many police. You
yeah,
know, if you've if you turn up to McDonald's and you have to line up behind the next person who's about to order a Big Mac, well, you just have to wait till somebody's available to deal with you. Well, the police is no different. If the fact is that the person in front of you is just as important, admittedly, probably not a great example in that you're never going to prioritize anybody. But if someone all of a sudden goes, any available units, shots fired, blah, 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 well, yeah, in that case, a lot of people are going to be ignored, like you would be when you're sitting in emergency with a sore finger and a car crash happens and the ambulance turns up with 4 victims of that. You prioritize where the urgent need is required. And that's why I really don't like. There's a bit of a meme getting around. It was a bit of a joke. And it's where a fella rings up, and the joke is that a fella rings up and he says, "There's 2 burglars have just broken into my house." And they go, "Oh, look, yep, no problem, sir, but you just need to be careful because don't have any units available." And he hangs up, no worries. And he rings back 5 minutes later, so there's no urgency now. I've shot them both. And he said 3 cars turned up and a helicopter flew overhead. When they approached him, he goes, "I thought you had no one available." And the answer is they didn't have anybody available. But
mm,
you just hit the top of the list because you said you murdered 2 people, and now other people are being completely ignored who probably need police because you just became number one on the block and you needed instant response. You needed us to ignore the needs of others because you've told us that you murdered 2 people. I think that joke was actually that they're still here arrested, but I thought you said you didn't have any people. It's like, yeah, but you've
yeah,
just committed murder, so of course we drop everything and run and just ignore the hell out of everyone else. In fact, if you ever did that for real, you would probably get arrested for
yeah.
some kind of offence against false reporting or something. I don't know. There would have to be some kind of law against that
Oh,
because the fact of the matter is, you do. We have
which
literally ignored other people who desperately need police because you just became number one on the ground.
Yeah. Oh, mate, you just actually reminded me. Um, it, so one thing I mentioned to a lot of people is how many times did people try and call police, but we're so just going to job to job to job that they'd sit there and say there was a knife because they wanted you to attend. How many
Yeah,
jobs have you attended where they said there's a knife and there's no knife in the vicinity?
no,
And that can build complacency as well because you sit there and you start thinking, oh well, there was no knife before, so you know, there won't be
Yeah,
one
no,
this time.
and the other trouble with this is you'll get a bad read when you get to court.
Yeah,
If the matter resolves in that there was actually a knife, and you might have got on the radio and said some smart ass remote, like, they'll just be saying there's a knife again because they want us there straight away, like they've done 100 times before, I might
yeah,
add, and then you don't rush there and you turn up and someone's been stabbed. All of a sudden, that recording comes across and shows you to be completely just ignorant to the fact of life. And not just that, you're now completely under the pump. You're being dragged before the man because they said there was a knife. It's like, yeah, but they always say there's a knife. This time there happened to be a knife, and it's ridiculous. We didn't mean this. Like,
yeah.
there hasn't been a knife ever, and yeah, no, it's just not a good thing.
No,
The the other thing I will mention here as well is that as you get much more experienced, you do. I found I did anyway. My complacency went completely away because it's like everything. It's like when you learn your job. When you're first starting your job, you know nothing, and you know nothing. So you've got very little. You're alerted to everything. Very quickly, you realise that a lot of this stuff's ridiculous, and you may not have experienced it blowing up in your face. So that's where that complacency gets in. Complacency is really prevalent amongst junior but relatively experienced police. So we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the job and more. But when you get to 10 years and you've probably been through a coronial and you've had your bottom smacked more than once, and what happens then is you go, forget whether there's an operational matter here. The fact of the matter is I can open myself up administrationally or disciplinarily for not responding to this appropriately. So you just start to really do the job, even if it's not real and you think it's not real. You just know that you have to respond in a certain way.
yeah,
I find this also comes with chit chat on radio. Not that this happens much anymore, but back in the day, chit chat on radio is about comments on offenders and things like that. We would do that once we were confident in our job, but um, we're still junior. We just don't realize we're junior until you're not junior anymore. It takes all of that experience to learn that you just have to respond, even if you go, look, it's probably bullshit, but it might not be. Um, you sort of learn that over time. So I think that complacency is a real danger for people who've been in the job a little while.
yeah,
So it's not, you'll very rarely find, unless they're completely incompetent, you very rarely find a complacent probie Connie about 3 months in the job who might have seen a bit of fear or might have been cocky or confident out of the college and all of a sudden they're not. That's good. You need a bit of that. And it's funny that Reese was on to me from the police air wing because two of my brothers are pilots. They're not commercial pilots, but they're private pilots. And they talk about it's about 100 hours after you get your pilot's license. They said they call it almost the dead man's curve because what happens is you're confident in your ability to fly an aircraft and nothing's ever gone wrong before. So why would anything go wrong now? And what's actually happened is nothing's ever happened yet. So they're very confident. They know how to fly the aircraft. They know how it responds. They've landed it, a couple of hundred times. They might have, or not 100, but they might have landed it a few times, and they're very confident in the ability of the aircraft. And then the perfect thing that happens at that 100 hours is you have something go wrong in the aircraft that you never thought would occur, but it doesn't kill you. Because what that will do is show you that even if you're doing everything right and you're competent at flying that plane, this thing can kill you real quick. And what happens then is you don't just have confidence, you've also got the ability to foresee issues and pre-plan for the unexpected. And I think that is relevant to a lot of professions, and especially those sharp end emergency services and military, and obviously airline pilots or just pilots in general. That if something goes wrong with this aircraft right now, I need a place to land. So as a result, experienced pilots now, once beyond that 100 hour dead man's curve, go, well, this could happen, this could happen. They're constantly looking for where the threat could come from. They're comfortable in their abilities to fly the aircraft, but they're also aware of the unexpected. And I think that happens in policing a lot. It's like, I'm comfortable. I can pull these vehicles over. geez, I was comfortable going to tactical jobs, but I'm not the one holding the gun. I was the one holding the mobile phone generally. Um,
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter. I'm still at risk. I'm still there. Things can still go completely wrong by my response. And I think it took a lot of experience to not just understand that I'm comfortable in doing my job and I'm confident that I can achieve the outcome, but I'm not so cocky as to think that something can't go completely wrong that I can't predict. And I think that's the elimination of complacency comes from good leadership and then experience.
Yeah. Mate, yeah, exactly, and I would completely agree with you. Yeah, because I found even later on, you don't react to things the same. You react in a well. I mean, I thought there was something wrong with me because I was so calm when I'm reacting. However, you do a lot of because you've learnt lessons from the past. You put things in place as a protection, I suppose, or you do things slightly differently because you've been taught those serious lessons and you've survived them, and come out the other side. There was something mentioned to me. I thought I became a better investigator after I worked in prosecutions, because when you're actually listening to the arguments in court, when you go and investigate something, you are always trying to counteract what defense have said in court. So you
Absolutely.
yeah, so you come from a completely different perspective. And it was something actually. Oh, I can't remember his name. He said it to me years early when I was first working in family and domestic violence unit. He said, the more time you spend in court, he said even prosecuting, you will become a better investigator. And yeah, but that goes, that also proves that everything that you go to, every domestic you go to, you will sit there and something will trigger you to sit there and think, you know what, something's not quite right here. Something else needs to be done. And I think you're dead right. You go through that bit where where you start off in the police, and then you're just excited by everything, and your heart rate goes up and all that sort of thing. And then you get through probably the bit of a complacent stage. But like you said, then something happens and it kind of snaps you out of it. But then you learn from that. And later on, I found that I was calmer. So my heart rate didn't change, or very rarely, depending on what was happening. But you would think clearer. Um,
Well, yeah,
and
and you're thinking far more holistically. You're thinking about
yeah,
the entire outcome, and I think that's where it's funny. I was having a conversation with my offsider training here today when we were having a beer after work. It was, um, if only I could take my brain out of my head now and stick it into my much younger head. And he said, "Well, that's the great, that's everyone's knowledge. Oh, if only I could go back and do this. Yeah, well, that doesn't exist, mate. So it's like that. It's just you can't beat experience. You can't beat
yeah.
lots of different experiences for learning and seeing the complete outcome of a potential situation. And nowhere is that more serious than something like policing.
You corrupt a younger Damo.
Oh, well, the running joke was, my God, you'd be a chick magnet. You'd be so confident. You know exactly what to say. You'd be a bloody millionaire by the time you're 21. You'd have a
Yeah.
work ethic through the roof. You wouldn't be lazy. You wouldn't give a shit about the pubs and nightclubs. And it's like, oh, man. But anyway, that can't ever occur, Schultzy.
No.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
no, very good. So I think,
Well,
mate, we've covered off there. I think we were going to talk a bit more about something else too, but we're at bloody nearly 40 minutes. So
I know.
Um, yeah, the old complacency. Look, it's a constant thing, and it would be so relevant. There'd be so many police just going, "Oh, you're so right." The complacency is, and everyone's guilty of it. This is the thing. I'm not saying I've done. We're going to throw out some examples. I've already mentioned a couple where I've been punched in the head by people who I never expected to give it to me because I was complacent. I assumed I wasn't going to get hit, and you should never assume. You
Yep.
know, to assume makes an ass out of you and me. So yeah, no, there was no, I'm very lucky that my little, episodes of complacency haven't had serious consequences. But other times, and you know what, the William matter was not complacency. That was a freak thing. There's no way anyone could have seen that. I'm sure
No.
once they got close to the building, they were going to have some operational tactical awareness about them and things like that. The fact of the matter is nobody could possibly foresee what was going to occur there. So that's a very bad example of complacency. It wasn't complacency.
No,
Um,
no, you're dead
but
right.
there's plenty of other examples. I mean, just get on YouTube and Google police traffic stop US gunshot, and you see a police officer. Hey, how you doing today, sir? Bang. And I
Yep.
mean, even that's bloody. At what point does it not? It's probably even a poor example in itself because you can't really predict that either. And that's the thing. You've just got to be so tactically aware. And I think so many police are aware of how dangerous the job can be. I think it's our job to convey to people who aren't operational police that, um, you know, you can relate to this because you've been complacent in your work plenty of
Yep.
times, but your consequences are not like this. And I think
No.
I think the goal of today is to make people realise that police are human beings, and yes, there is complacency. Certainly, there is definitely complacency at times, um, but then put yourself in a situation that you can relate to, being your own employment, and think when you've been complacent, and that's potentially cost something in whatever your business may be.
Yeah. Yep. That's
Mm.
exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah, mate. And it's funny. We always have something else we're going to we're going to move on to, but we managed to to fill it in. But and one of the things I'll just say, Mark Nash actually mentioned to us. We mentioned him last week, but he said just like about police being victims, and we will go into that. But it made me think about how the police get complaints or complaints against police, and it happens all the time. But yeah, mate, we'll have to definitely leave that for another one because I've got a couple of stories, and that will probably take us quite a while to get through, I think.
yeah. So it might be next week. We talk about complaints against police and how of course, that has to exist. You have to have police hold a lot of authority, and with that comes a lot of responsibility and accountability, and no one's ever taking away from that. But I think one part of it that we might talk about next week is the fact that that complaint system can be used by defence lawyers, can encourage their clients to misuse the complaint system in order to try and take the heat off them. And that's certainly something I experienced firsthand. And I know that there's plenty of stories about how complaints against police can be quite often extremely overzealous, and no other employment that I'm aware of is held to that same level of account. So we'll talk about that next week. But yeah, mate,
Yeah,
that's a good little discussion on complacency, and I think the takeaway is that um, the mundane nature of work that has the potential to be dangerous breeds complacency with high levels of consequence.
yep, yep, exactly
Yeah.
right. Anyway, mate, well, I suppose we'll finish it off, and
We'll wrap it
we'll
up.
see you
Yeah.
all next week.
Yep. See you then. Get in touch. Let us know what you think.
Yep, see ya.